Hey everyone, this is Sean. In this video, I will show you some of the most important use cases of React, which is the very essential part when writing front-end project. Does not matter which framework you're using. Some people code in Next.js, some people use Lovable, which is using another framework called Vite. And a lot of my friends who I spoke with, they're probably back-end engineers and they haven't spent a lot of time on the front-end side of things. Watching this video will help you learn, I think 95% of the chances where you're going to use TypeScript React in your front end. And oftentimes people also use Next.js for a full stack project, so that's even better, okay? And sometimes I realize that, for Vite coders or some aspiring founders, you might have been iterating quite a few times with Cursor, with Lovable, with V0, and you realize that some bugs just don't really solve by themselves by keep asking questions. And if you download the code, you realize that you don't understand what's going on there. So in this video, I will explain these things, and hopefully after watching this, you'll be able to use React like a pro. Okay, cool. Let's get started. So right here, I've got Next.js, I've got Lovable, I've got Vite, so all of these tools you can use, but at the core of it, it's React, okay? And then I created a GitHub repo over here. One second. Yeah, it's called yt-react-next.js-tips under my Git repo, Shen Chen, and I'll be uploading some of the latest stuff to you. But essentially, here are the main things that I'm going to teach you guys. Well, I know reading this is very, very, very plain, but I'll show you what example I embedded this knowledge in before I show you the code, okay? So here's the React app that I built previously, okay? The first topic we're going to cover is called state management. It's going to use some of the most commonly used cases called useState and useEffect. These two, I would say, account for, 70% of the 95% of the chances that you can use React. So this is the most core, most important part. And if you already know React, feel free to jump to the later chapters because this probably will be a little bit more basic, but I'll try to skim through it so that, it's not too beginner, but also at the same time you can learn something, okay? And then, for example, here you can sort of create this counter, you can add numbers, you can reset it, and then this live clock is sort of using a useEffect to make sure that the time is being generated real time and renders real time, okay? And then the second topic we're going to cover is right here called component architecture. So essentially, if you click on any of the buttons, it's going to show you secondary button, okay, destructive button. It tells you danger. So this is depending on the exact proposition that you pass on to a function so that the return will be different, okay? The third one is called conditional rendering. So here I've got this card that, looks a little complicated, but essentially if I click on try again, it's going to generate a random number. And if that number is smaller than 0.7 or equal to 0.7, it shows the user detail. If it's not, I'll just refresh. Oh, still smaller than 0.7. If I refresh, oh, got pretty good luck today. If it's greater than 0.7, then it's gonna conditionally tell me, okay, it failed. All right. So this is called conditional rendering, which is very, very important when you write projects. The fourth one is called data display. So imagine you have a to-do list here, and if you click some of them, it's gonna cross them out, and then eventually it's gonna update this progress bar real time. Okay. This is having a bunch of list of items, and you want to render them conditioning on which ones you're selecting. All right, so there's a bit of a rendering and keys management that will help you map out a list of items. Number 5 is called user interaction, which is helping you to handle some forms of submission and manage some data management after you submit data. So for example, if I put in my email right here and I say hello, and I hit send message, it's going to store it right here locally on this computer, and then you're going to surface these data. If I use a different email, sean@mit.edu, and say sup, send message. Okay, so you have two data here, and you can clear them out. Okay, so this is called this is using a tool called event handling or a form submission, which is so important if you're building any AI tools that has some kind of chat interface there, or if you have any form that need to allow your user to fill in information. Okay, And then here we're using like a local storage, but in the modern time, you can just use Supabase. And feel free to watch my previous video for Supabase. Okay, number 6 is this thing called a global state, which is you need to set up some context so that if you toggle this, the whole thing, the whole UI will become dark mode. Okay, if you switch it back, the whole UI will come back to light mode. So there's a bit of a term called context switching in React that you need to learn. Okay, number 7, which is the last one. Well, I say top 8 because the first one contained 2 things, useState and useEffect. So number 7 is actually number 8. Okay, so here if I just, essentially it's very similar. It's called, I can build a custom hook. A hook is basically a function that you can use like repetitively across your file. So for example here, I can say hello, add note, sub, add note, kind of similar to the form submission, but then here you can sort of define the function in a way that it can be repetitively used. Okay, so I'll show you every single one of them, and after these, I believe like 95% of the chance you'll be fine with the React. And there are some more advanced use cases. I can make some videos in the future, but that's not relevant for today's video. Okay, so let's move to code now. Okay, I prepared this repo, which is this GitHub. Okay, and then I'm just like running it in cursor. So let's look at the structure of this code. So firstly, you have a Next, which is a Next.js project. You have node component, which is all the packages that I downloaded. You have a public file where it's like a bunch of images, I believe, for resale. And I've got a source folder, which is what every code file is based at, and a bunch of other things that records things like GitHub ignore, your formatting, Next.js related stuff, packaging, README file. So these are not important. Okay, so let me just close everything that's saved. The most important thing is this source folder. And by the way, if this is the first time to use GitHub, you can click on terminal here, and then you can come back to this code and click on code and copy this HTTPS, copy this, come back here, and if you just say git clone, paste this link and hit enter, and you'll be able to download this whole thing. Okay, so to avoid confusion, I won't do that one more time. Okay, cool. I'll keep my terminal here. So if I go to the dashboard, okay, so wait, hold on. Let me delete this. Yeah, cool. I like to keep 2 terminals open here. One of them is if I do, npm run dev. One of them is for running the front end code. The other one is for me to play around with things like git status, can check the git. Okay, so to avoid visual complexity, I'll hide it for now. Okay, let's get started on the first topic that we're going to cover, which is state management, useState. Okay, so remember in the code, we have this first example called a counter. And if you add numbers here or a reduced number, it's real time and you can reset it. Okay, and I'm going to turn on Command Option I to show you this sidebar that shows you if I have any errors. Okay, so I think there's a small error here related to, let me just refresh it, Command R. Yeah, so I increase the number or decrease the number, I reset. Okay, so this is not relevant. I'm not logging anything here. So let's just close it. Cool. So let's get started. Wait, hold on. Let me just make it bigger. Great. So the way we did it was this. It might seem a little simple, but if you come back to the code, here is the counter function on line 24. What it does is that it's using this function called useState. What useState does is that it's defining 2 things. Number 1, count as a variable. Number 2 is a function or it's a hook that can help you set count while your count number is being changed. It's constantly being updated everywhere else. Okay. So initially, I initialized count with 0. So when I return this component, okay, you can see that I am returning this variable with a curly bracket called count. And whenever I click on the button to increase, Okay, let's find out where's the click button. You see right here? Whenever I click on the plus button right here to increase, it's calling this function called increment. Okay, and this increment function right here is calling the set count hook over here and saying count plus 1. All right, this is the most basic concept in React, which is a state management tool. All right, so I'll show you a counter example right now so that it makes more sense, because you might feel like, okay, this is like very natural, but it's actually not. Okay, so the bad example is like this. I'll just comment out the good example. Okay, the bad example is like you're setting count to be 0 and you're defining an increment function. The increment function has no input and the output is basically count plus 1. All right, let's see, let's hit command save and come back to the code. Let's see if it works. Okay, it doesn't work. Look at this. If I do command option I, let's see what we're recording. Look at this. On the right hand side, can you see? My count is changing, but this number, this digit count, is not being updated real time. Why is that? Because in this case, right now, for this bad example, the count was not defined in a use state. It's not being managed the state. So this variable is not constantly tracking what we're changing. Okay, so that's like the most handy part of using React, because they already wrote these functions for you, and then you can just set up a properly managed variable that you can just change its state and it will be constantly updated. Okay, so this is the first use case. I'll move on to the next one because this is pretty basic. The second one is called useEffect. Okay, so what useEffect does is that it handles side effects. So in our example, we're using timers, but sometimes you can also use it for API calls. You can use it for subscriptions, all these kind of things. Okay, so let's just read this comment that I prepared. So you never run the side effects directly in render function because that causes infinite loops. What does that even mean? I'll show you real examples to help you understand what it means. When I was learning useEffect, I was like, what the heck does it do? Right? I was a Python coder, I have no idea what's going on in the front end, and it turns out that it's like what React does is that it just helps you like render your page, like refresh your page constantly so that it feels like it's real time. So like imagine if you're clicking on the like button for an Instagram post, and then on another phone, friend's phone, they receive that like immediately, right? That's because like they're constantly rendering it and under some conditions, which I will explain later. Okay, so also it helps you to clean up the side effects to prevent memory leaks. I'll also show you what that actually means with a real example. These are too computer sciencey. I don't think it really matters in your day-to-day building. And eventually, there's a dependency that will show you under what condition will you re-render the page. Okay, cool. After all these buzzwords, let's actually jump right into the code. Okay, so for the line number 86, we're defining this function called clock. All right, let's come back and look at this component one more time. All right. By the way, if this is your first time using Next.js, remember there's a terminal here. And if I just do Control-C, so if you're already in your repo, right, you can do git status, and then you can do npm run dev. And by the way, if this is your first time to use this repo, you should do npm install first, so that it installs all the packages you need. All right, and then you do npm run dev. And then you will get this localhost called localhost 3000, and you just come here and then paste it here. Okay, that's how you run it. Cool. Let's jump into the second example. Actually 1.5. The live clock, which is using useEffect. Okay, so this is interesting. This clock, you see, like right now it's 11:10 a.m. On my computer it's also 11:10 a.m. All right. It feels so natural, but how did it actually do it? Okay, let's figure out how to actually do it. Wait, my camera is a little finicky. Okay, cool. So the way we did it is the following. First of all, we're using useState one more time, by the way. And with this time, we're defining a time and set time. And by the way, we're using TypeScript, so you always need to define what type of the data you're using. So here, the type of time is date. And where did we define date? Actually, I think that's that's by default. Okay, I'll show you later that whenever we need to define what a type we should use. All right, so it either should be a date or it should be a null, and null is the default for time. Okay, null means like there's nothing there. All right, and then we have another use state called show bad example. That's just for me to show you later. All right, so let me show you a bad example right now so that you understand better. All right, so I'll just uncomment this, hit save. Okay, I'll turn on this show bad example. Nothing's happening. Why is that? Let me double check. Oh, wait, hold on. So let me refresh this page one more time. Oh, now it's happening. Okay, look at this. Look at this. Show bad example. Look at this. Oh my god, it's crazy. Renders. Oh my god. Sorry guys, I should stop this. This is crazy. Okay, cool. Let me handle this. Save. Whew. Now it stopped. Goes back to normal. So what exactly happened? What exactly happened is the following. Okay, let me just refresh. Refresh is Command R. Just click on page, Command R. Okay, my computer is stuck because of that infinite re-rendering. So what happened here was that because we're using a useEffect, okay, what this useEffect does is that if it's not a bad example being shown, which is this button, if I didn't click on that button, well, initially show bad example is false. So if I don't click on it, it remains false. So false opposite, exclamation mark means opposite, is true. All right, so if that is true, set the time to the current date, all right, and then set the timer with a set interval. Anything with set is like a hook. It helps you to run the function basically, all right? You run the function of no input, but then the output is basically you set the time, all right? And then 1,000 is 1,000 milliliters every second. Do this every second, okay? And then you return a clear interval of a timer. So you clear up the memory leaks. So you clear up the whole timer thingy. So what it does is that if I uncomment the bad example one more time, you see, I'm using set timeout just like the set timeout example. I'm using set time just like below. Okay, I'm using the same function basically, but the problem is this will trigger another render every single time you run this. Okay, every single time you run this, it triggers a new render. What does that mean? Whenever this clock function is being run, which means we're refreshing the page, okay? We're refreshing this page. Every time we refresh this page, what happens is that it will run this clock function, and then within this clock function, it defines all these variables, the states, and then it runs this if statement. And whenever it hits this if statement that, show back is shown, it runs this function, and it runs the set time. But because set time is a hook, is a function that React would think, okay, if you run this, there's something you're changing about this product, so let me refresh this page. Okay, so that's why it happens like the behavior that we saw earlier, which is every time it hits here, whenever it's on this line, it re-renders the whole thing. So it goes through clock and this function one more time. So that means it's infinite. All right, it keeps going because every time you hit here, it's re-rendering and it goes back here and doing it again. So there's infinite loop. So what useEffect does is that it prevents them from doing that. It kills that behavior, okay? So if I uncomment that out, what useEffect does is that it only re-renders if I change the status of show bad example. Remember, show bad example is a state that we defined earlier. So only if we switch this will we re-render this useEffect, okay? And the useEffect is what? Is the thing inside of it, all right? It set the new time, it set the timer, and then eventually it cleared the interval for the timer, which is very clean, and it doesn't re-render the whole thing, okay? Look, guys, even if you don't understand what I talked about, even if that was like too complicated for you, here's one thing that you should remember, which is whenever you want something that renders based on some kind of conditions, like if I like somebody's post on Instagram, you want everybody's page to refresh. use our useEffect because you might want to put a condition here to tell the program when you will you will render this. Okay, instead of like I don't know, burn your CPU by running infinitely. Whenever you want something that happens real time, use useEffect, and then you can use AI to understand what's going on. Okay, let me save this. And then every time you see return, that's just like what's being returned after running this function. And then now, because in Next.js, it's returning a thing called the JSX, which is you're kind of writing JavaScript, TypeScript, but then you're returning an HTML, which is the components that you're seeing here. Okay, it's just the more convenient way of writing code. If you don't understand, it's okay. Okay, so yeah, here is just how we define it, like live clock, right? The demo toggle, which is this show bad example toggle, and then the visual feedback, right, which is showing me, you know, if it's a bad example, it was showing me previously the notifications, and then you know, all these rest of things. All right, cool. That's it. That's for the top two examples, and you have just learned 70% of React. That's literally the most commonly used use cases. And the rest of them are just making you more like a pro. Okay, let's get started. So the number 3 thing is called props and component composition. Okay, let's see the example one more time. What was the example? The example is this. All right, so I was saying I have a bunch of buttons. What I'm trying to convey here is that if I click on primary button, it tells me it's primary. If I click on secondary button, it tells me it's secondary. If I click on destructive, it tells me it's danger. Okay, seems very, very simple, but it carries a very important concept in React, which is sending propositions as variables into functions so that you don't have to define 3 different functions right here. You only need 1 function for defining buttons. I'll show you what I mean. Let's come back to the code. Okay, so firstly, it's okay. I know there are too many words. Just follow me. Follow what I'm saying. Firstly, I'm defining this type or interface called button props. Okay, because remember earlier I was talking about date being a type that you need to fill in to use state. Because we write in TypeScript, we always need to be careful about the types. Okay, so in this case, it's interface. It's a type of, excuse me. It kind of is the type for the props of a function. All right, so whatever that's being sent as input into the button function, I need to define what formats they are required, right? So for example, the first one is called variant, right? Is this a primary button, secondary button, or destructive button? And children, all right? Children is a React node. OnClick is a function, okay? What function is it? Oh, it takes no input, just a click, and then returns nothing, okay? And then disabled is a Boolean, right? And then now I'm initializing it with false. And type is a button, okay? Or submit or reset, these kind of things, all right? And then, so you see, like we define the button function just like this, with the return, with the button, and then we pass in these variables as input into this button component, okay? And then eventually we're showing basically this, okay? Function button showcase, where, look at this. We're showing a button with the variant being personalized, defined, okay? It's primary, secondary, or destructive. And on click, if you click on it, there's a different function. Either send the alert of a primary if it's in the primary situation, send secondary if it's secondary situation, send danger if it's destructive button, and eventually have a disabled button, which is disabled, okay? Which matches exactly these 4 buttons. This is so basic. I know probably you're confused. Why am I talking about the whole thing? I'll show you the bad example right now. The bad example is very simple. Basically, you define submit button, cancel button, or primary button, or, you know, I think this is a bad example that I defined. What I wanted to do was like, you need to define a button just for primary button, define another button for secondary button. But in our case, look at this, we define button only once, okay? Only once. And then we're just like changing it by replacing the variant here, okay? And I can like by all means, I can do another one. Okay, I can just say variant equals Sean. Okay, there's a bug because I never defined Sean. So let's define right here. You see, AI already captured the variant type can be Sean. Okay, and then alert would be like Sean is on fire. Okay, hit save, and then I'll call it Sean button. Hit save. Look at this. I've got another Sean file. Sean button. Sean is on fire. Okay, and I didn't define the UI, so that's why it doesn't look very good. Let me see if I can change the UI real quick. No, I think I didn't define it in my backend, but that's okay. That's okay. Cool. So actually, if I just do like primary here, I'm using the primary buttons UI right there. You see, Sean button. Okay. Good. Okay, move on. The third one, well, actually the fourth one, but anyways, is called conditional rendering. Okay. What it does is that you're kind of like using an if-else statement, but then it's very TypeScript specific. Okay. So I'll show you the example right here. We move down. Sorry about the number disruption. It's like pattern 4, but it's okay. So what we're doing is that we're being very careful about how do we load states, errors, and feature some flags here. Okay. The problem is sometimes imagine like a user is logged in. Okay. If a user logged in with their name and email, like if you're using Codebase or anything, Next.js auth or a clerk, if you log in a user, they might, if they're properly logged in, they have name and email. If not, or sometimes they're still loading, right? Sometimes they're still loading. Sometimes there's an error, okay? So here we're basically showing the use case of depending on the state, if the user is already properly logged in or is still loading or is still error, how do we surface different things, okay? So here's the thing. We define a function called fetch user, and then you see we're using useEffect. With the useEffect, that means like we only define this fetch user once, okay? This empty list means that it's not depending on anything, but also it means like it's telling React that you're defining this function once when you render, like for once and for all, okay? You're not really repeatedly doing that, okay? And within this fetch user, we're basically saying, firstly, we define a bunch of state, right? And then we set a timeout of 2 seconds. Within this 2-second timeout, what we're doing is that we define a random number between 0 and 1, okay? And then I'm basically saying like if it's if it's greater than 0.7, we say it failed. If it's less or equal to 0.7, we say, okay, let's set the username and the user email, okay? And then eventually we return that, right? So if it's still loading, look at this. This curly bracket is basically an if statement, okay? If it's still loading, and do this, okay? Show loading user data. If there's an error, all right, show there's an error. Show what the error is, and then tell me exactly what's going on. And then also show me the user profile, right? That's why we were seeing the previous example. Like if I say reload user, you see, now it's in loading state, so it's showing me loading user data. And now the number has been generated, it's telling me, okay, it's a success, show me this user. Reload user one more time, it's generating another random number, still smaller, equal to 0.7. Reload it again, it's all random until you hit something greater than 0.7. Okay, so what we observed just now was, it was in loading state, and it was showing me loading user data. This is important for user experience, by the way. Like if you're running some user login or calling some API, you better like show some loading state so that your user is not confused, right? And then later, like if there's no error, like it's not loading, it's not error, and user is fine, right? You say please log in, and if the user is already there, which is the case that we're building, you say user logged in successfully, and then you show them the username and the user email. Okay, so this is a very oversimplified example to show you what conditional rendering really means. All right? Yeah, conditional rendering. Okay, we're done. Move on. The fifth one is called list rendering and keys. All right, this is one of my favorite part. So let's come to this one. It's called data display. Okay, so here I have a list of to-do or checklists, right? Learn React, master useEffect, understand propositions, understand conditional rendering, build some awesome apps. And if I click on each one of them, it just sort of knows which one I'm clicking and then calculates the progress, right? So the way we did it is that, first of all, again, we have an interface called to-do, right? Remember, this is kind of like type, right? We are defining the to-do, okay? To-do. And then what we're doing is we're initializing it with the 5 to-dos here, okay? And the 5 to-do for each data entry, it must follow the same data format, just like this interface, all right? ID is a number, 1. Text is a string, okay, it's a string. Learn React useState. Complete is a boolean, true, okay. And then you have a toggle function, which takes as input the ID, which is a number, and then it will set to-dos to the following. Remember, to-do is a 3 data entry state, okay. What it does is that it scans through the to-dos now, which is this initialized list, all right? It maps the to-dos, and then for each to-do, by the way, this to-do, you can write anything. You can write you can write to-do my list, you can write whatever. This just means it's one of the items in this list which contains these 5 things, okay? So every to-do, the first thing is you're checking, is the to-do's ID equals the ID that we're selecting right now? All right, this question mark. If yes, do this. If wrong, do this. Okay. So if the ID that I chose is number 2, okay, what it does is that this toggle to do knows the ID equals number 2, and then it starts to reset the to do the whole list by checking each one of them. All right, for each one of them, first one is ID equal to. Is ID equal to 2? No? Okay, leave it as it is, okay? To do, still this to do, leave it as it is. Map the second one, okay? The second one, is ID, to do ID equals to 2? Is ID equals to 2? Yes, okay? Then do this, okay? What it does is that it keeps all the to do as it is for now, and then for this completed item, switch it to the opposite way, all right? Remember, completed is a boolean, okay? And put an exclamation mark in front of it means turning it into, if it's false, then turns it into true. If it's true, turns it into false, okay? And then so on and so forth, all right? It maps through the whole list so that if I click on this, it's only like adding effects on this one, not elsewhere, okay? So this is called list rendering. It's rendering the list, and then I'll show you what keys means here. Okay, so now eventually you have like completed count. Okay, so what it does is that it goes through the current to-dos. Remember, to-do is a state. If you change something, it's always being updated real time. It filters it out and check every to-do within these to-dos. Only tell me the length of the completed ones. All right, if there's only 1 completed, then the length equals 1. So this is a count. All right, these are all real time thanks to useState. So that's why, remember, like I said, this is like the 35% of the 95%, okay? The most important use case. Now comes the interesting part, okay? So I defined the following return of the component. Firstly, the title, learning checklist right here. And then I defined the progress bar. Progress bar is basically how many are completed divided by the total number of to-dos, all right? That's why when you click on a bunch of things, it's like 3 out of 5, 2 out of 5, 1 out of 5. And then, now comes the fun part, the bad example and the good example. The good example is saying, for the entire to-dos, map out every item of the to-do. Remember that we are attaching the keys of this division, of this div, to to-do's ID. I'll tell you what I mean by that, okay? And on click of it, we're targeting this specific to-do's ID. Remember, our to-do function is taking ID as an input, right? It's taking this as an input of the current to-do that the map is mapping to, okay? And then class name is like basically your interface, your UI, okay? It's showing me if it's completed, then show me the completed UI, which is this cross line and then a little bit grayer thingy. All right, I'll show you where I store this. All right, I'll just highlight this, Command C, Command Shift F, Command V. You see, it's on our global.css. Okay, so I define to do complete as like I put a line through it. Okay, I put a line through it, and it's a little grayer. Means like the opacity is 0.6. It's more opaque. It's less opaque. Sorry. Okay, cool. And the bad example, if I just uncomment this and save, I'll show you the magic part. So firstly, I got an error, obviously, and I'll make this a little bit smaller. Can you see like there's a bad example and a good example now? And of course, these are real-time updated. If I click on this, you see, they're all, the upper part and the lower part knows which one I'm selecting because we're using the same toggle to do function, okay? But the different part is that the upper part doesn't know that you need to cross things out, and that's because we're using this magic thing called to do ID as a key, so that it knows for this specific item we're changing its UI. Okay, and also it's not this error basically means that if you are a child within this division, you must have a unique key. So what happens is that in this bad example, every to-do has the exact same key, which is causing error for React. It's just some kind of type checks that they do. Okay, let me just comment it out. So just remember, if you don't understand everything I said, just remember that if you have a list of things that you need to display on a UI, say, let's say this is not to-dos, but like it's like a list of posts that you posted on your Instagram. You want to display them one by one. You do post.map, all right? And then for every post, you define whatever you want to post there, put an image there, put a like button there, whatever, and then make sure you put the keys here. Otherwise, there's going to be an error, okay? Move on. Next one. Event handling and forms. All right. We're going to use something more fun here called useCallback and useMemo. What useCallback does is that it prevents unnecessary re-renders in every child component. What does that even mean? I'll show you. Okay. So firstly, let's take a look at the example here. Okay. So remember this form? I can add my email. I can say hello and then add send message and then submit the form here. All right. We're basically talking about how do we submit forms and handle submission. That's so important because this is basically your user input. Okay. It doesn't matter what app you're building. Cool. So just what I wanted to show you, by the way, this is actually a bigger component because there's more features there. Feel free to jump into it and then do your own research and then learn more about it. But one thing I want to highlight here is with this form, firstly, you're defining a bunch of things, right? Errors, submit, data list, is submitting, next ID. These are less important. The important part is, are you using useCallback to prevent unnecessary re-renders? Okay, so when I define handle change, which is used in the bottom right here, all right? Whenever you change the input of name, the input of email, the input of message, all right? Whenever it's changing, on change, what happens is I'm defining this function called useCallback, and this on change function is basically saying I'm taking whatever that's already in the form as the input, and I'm returning the following function as an output. All right, useCallback is just helping us to not re-render and redefine this function every single time we re-render. So like if the page is kind of re-rendering itself, this function remains the same unless there's an error there. Okay, so what it does is that it just set up the form data and then handles the error data. Okay, the bad example is this. If I uncomment this, and I need to comment this. There we go. Okay, so I actually didn't write out the full logic here, but no, it's okay. It's okay. So the idea is basically for handle change and handle submit. Okay, here is a handle submit, which is the example that I wrote here, but there's not enough details there. What I wanted to say is that for these functions, because users are going to keep using them, okay? So what you don't want is whenever you use handle change or handle submit, you don't want to define this function again and again and again, because that could cause your app to maybe calculate something or define functions repetitively. Remember what I said like much earlier? React is making your app so interactive because they keep rendering, keep refreshing things. So you're using these tools to stop them from rendering when you don't want to. And sometimes there's some conflict between rendering, right? Maybe one person is liking your post, another person is commenting your post. Like, do I re-render? Like, there could be some conflicts. So you should use these tools well so that it's not re-rendering a bunch of things. And I know people are saying, okay, you can use Vite coding to deal with all of these things. Why do we need to learn this? It's because when you observe these scenarios in your app, like let's say things are conflicting with each other, things are keep rendering, you know where to look into, okay? You know what's going on, and you can prompt the right way to tell your app what's going on. That's so important when you are debugging your front end. Trust me, it's so important, especially if you're building some tools for like using voice. Like if you're communicating with an app with voice, then there's like constantly re-rendering things, constantly updating like whatever things they're saying. And then these tools come really, really handy. I built a tool called Chef Voice AI, which is for you to talk to your app, tell it to set a timer, and tell you back when you should add certain ingredients, do certain steps of the recipe. And I bump into so many like errors of conflicted problems between different states, between different components. So you need to really use these tools well. And so this is useCallback. Another thing is called useMemo. What useMemo does is it returns a value. Okay, it returns a value: total, unique email, average message length, and useCallback returns a function. Okay, you see, it returns a function, set this, whatever, set submitted detailed list. Okay, but they're doing the same thing, which is let's not recalculate this. All right, let's not recalculate this unless the submitted data list changed. All right, it's basically conditional rendering as well. All right, and that's very important when it comes to form submission. I know this topic is about event handling and forms, but that part is actually easy because you just literally define handle change and handle submit. And if you go down to the return, okay, the actual form is here. With this conditional rendering, the actual form is here. On submit, just if the user click on submit, if the user click on send message, which is on submit, it runs the function handle submit. All right. If the user clicks on, if the user types into the input inbox, then on change, it handles change, the function. Okay. So what's essential here is you don't want to burden your computer too much, and you don't want to add a lot of conflicts to your app. Okay. That's the core part. All right, feel free to look into this code. Ask your AI to explain what it does. I already showed you the interesting part. Okay, so the next one is another one of my favorite ones called context. Okay, it's called context. What it does is that, remember, it's a switch on and off. Okay. The bad example is you would pass in the information that my theme has changed from dark to light to every single component you wrote. But in reality, we don't want that. In reality, we want to click on one of them and every single component should change to light mode automatically. And if I switch back, everything should change automatically. The reason why we can do this is because we set up a context and everything is wrapped inside of that context. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're using another React component called create context. Okay, what create context does is that, remember, this is an interface, the theme is a string, and toggle theme is a function. Okay, and this theme context, we're leveraging it to create a provider. Okay, don't worry if you don't understand this, but this is so important for say theme and also for user information, right? You don't want to log in every single page. You want to log in once and all of your app understand your user information. That's also using use context. Okay, this is so important. With theme context, with the provider, we define this function. Oh, my Siri. This theme provider, I'll show you. Command C, Command F, Command V. It's right here. Okay. This entire dashboard, which is imported here. All right. This is a dashboard we defined. Let's do command click. This entire dashboard is wrapped under the theme provider. Okay, and do command click into theme provider. We define it here, theme provider. Okay, how do we define it? We define it by create a context called theme context, and that context provider is taking the input of theme. And if you click on this button, that's going to trigger this function called toggle theme. Remember, this is using a callback because we don't want to redefine this function every single time. It's switching from the previous one. If the previous one is light, change it to dark. Otherwise, change it to light. Okay, switching the theme. And then you're sharing this context of the new theme that your toggle has switched to the entire dashboard. All right, let's see where we're defining this. Yeah, here's the dashboard content that has everything, like section 1, counter and clock, section 2, the button showcase, section 3, user profile, to-do list, contact form, theme toggle, everything's here. Okay, so this is so important. And normally, I wouldn't recommend you guys to write code like this. This is just for showcasing an example. All right, let me move back here. Sorry, that was already custom hooks. Let's move back here with the context. Normally, I wouldn't define the context here. I would put it in a folder called context over here. Okay, so let's do this real time. Let me tell my AI, I'd be like, okay, select this, Command Shift L. I want to move this context to our contexts folder so that our code is more clean. But let's keep the title and comments and some basic functions here for the tutorial. Okay. Actually, let me use Asian mode. Command I, turn on Asian mode. Yeah, let's move it to context. And by the way, if you define like customized hooks, like we're going to show you later, or some of the functions that you keep using, like library, you should move them here so that your code is not overcomplicated. Because if you cram everything in one page, that's why when you do vibe coding, you keep asking questions and then the AI keep confusing itself because it doesn't understand where and what, and because things are conflicting with each other. You must do it very clean. So look at this. I'm creating this new file called theme context here. Okay. And then back in the dashboard, what happens is that I'm removing this. Okay. And I'm going to call theme context from here. Okay. And within the dashboard, we don't need to do that. So let's see what we changed. Okay. So Firstly, we are importing context from this context folder, theme context, okay? And then down here, I'm still keeping the bad example here, pattern 7, but we're not defining these details here anymore. We're still defining the toggle here, but we're using the useTheme function that we defined over here, okay? useTheme right here, okay? And then, yeah, let's command enter to accept these changes. All right, if I go down, it should still work. Yeah, still work. Okay, so if you're doing user login, try to do the same thing. Add a user login context here, and then whenever you need the context, wrap it around this. And normally I don't even wrap it here. I put it in the layout. Look at this. In the layout, I have the body and children. I usually wrap it around children. All right, so that the entire page knows what's going on. Okay, let's do it. Let's try it. So actually, let's wrap the context of theme in the layout to keep things consistent and clear. Okay, this is the real vibe coding that can help you to build a robust project instead of just hallucinating and writing a bunch of random things that doesn't make sense, and then AI confuses itself and you're confused as well. All right, this is called refactoring. After you build out some of the most important features of your product, you refactor it, like you restructure some of the layouts. Okay, so now we're wrapping around our theme provider on the children. Okay. And then back in the dashboard, we should remove this. We should return this, okay? And let's see, should still work. Yeah, cool, still works. But now you're managing everything under source, app, layout, and all the theme provider context is right here. Okay, let's just accept everything. All right, I think I already reviewed this. Accept. Cool. All right, guys, we're already at 90%. Let's finalize this and let's finish it up. Cool. Let's move back up. Number 8, custom hooks and performance. Honestly, a lot of things you should already know. For the smart notes, let's say hello, add. This is exactly the same as the form submission. Allow me to go. And I can clear the notes. Okay. What I'm trying to show you is just that you can create your own hooks, right? A hook is basically like this: set sort value or use. Sorry, this is not a hook, by the way. My bad. A hook is use whatever. If I say something like set, it should be use something. That is a hook. If I had some, if I said it wrong in the previous part of the video, please correct myself. Please correct what I said. Okay. Use local storage. This is the function that we're defining, which is a hook. And then we're using this hook right here. Okay. Within this use hook, we have set, the variable, and the set state. Okay. This is just like use state, but just that use state has already been defined by React and Next.js, so you don't have to do it. So normally I would keep this customized hook within the hooks folder. Okay. So let me just do that. I'll highlight this. I'll say we should move this hook to our hooks folder to keep things clean. Would you agree? All right, I used too much AI. Oh, I lost my internet. That's why. One second. We're done. We're almost done. Come on, give me AI. Come on, I need internet. Okay, cool. We got internet. Back online. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Yeah, now I understand what I mean. So this customized hook should be in the hooks folder to keep things clean. I'll just let it finish. Okay. And then did I prepare a bad example here? Yeah, I think I'm just gonna show useMemo. You already seen it. useMemo is essentially making sure that we're returning this calculated results, and we're not recalculating it every single time we render unless the notes has changed. Unless the notes here has changed, then we redefine this note stats. Okay, that's what useMemo does. Cool. So now we have removed this custom hook to here. We're calling it use local storage.ts. TS means TypeScript. TSX means just like JSX, which is using TypeScript functions, but then it's returning an HTML at the end. Okay. Yeah, let me just accept the change. I think it works still. Let's see. Yeah, still works fine. Okay. Cool. I think that's about it. I will commit this, git status, git add, git commit -m, updated the content while filming, git push. A bit of conflicts. I should fetch first. Oh yeah, because we changed the README earlier. So let me just do git fetch first. Wait. Let me use AI. I'm not sure. Help me finalize this. Push. Okay. So while we're finishing up, I'll just sort of go through this overview one more time. So if you go back to this GitHub, remember this Vite-React-Next.js-tips. We went through the top 8 most important patterns: useState, useEffect, component, props, conditional rendering, mapping a list with keys, handling events and form submission, and then eventually defining context and defining hooks. I honestly think this will be so useful when you do vibe coding. Doesn't matter what tool you're using, Cursor, Lovable, v0, it's going to be so useful for you. And, this one has already helped me to finish this. Run this. Yeah, I think people are saying you don't need to learn to code anymore. I strongly disagree. I think if you learn the basics of the code and you understand what tools you're using, then when there is an error, when there's a problem, you'll be able to actually properly handle it, and you will understand when you observe certain effects on the website that you built, and then you can change it. You will know how to prompt to fix these errors. So I think that's why it's so important to do these kind of things. And I hope this video is very helpful for you. I hope you guys can leave me some feedback and tell me if you think this is good. Any content, similar content, let me know. But I think this is so important for AI, vibe coding, building any tools, because the majority of the apps these days are written in TypeScript. New apps, like all these tools using TypeScript. So learn the basics of it is really, really important. Okay. Cool. Let's see if it's done. Just accept everything. Get status. Get push. Pull, fetch, push. Wait. What did I do? Are you stuck? Real-time debugging. Let's see what's going on. Git pull before pushing again. See the node. Fast forward. Open a merge editor and get interrupted. Run again. Perfect. See the status now. See what's happening. Let's merge remote changes. Okay, that makes sense. Excellent. Okay, let's run it. done. Let's refresh this. Okay. Cool, we're done. Let's check in the source folder, in the context folder. Yeah, we have theme context. In the hooks folder, we have the hooks. Okay, cool, guys. I think this is very helpful. This will be very helpful for your coding. And by the way, if you're interested in launching a full stack application, I also have prepared something for you. launch-mvp.shengchen.io. This is a GitHub that I built previously in another video saying, basically it's called launch-mvp-stripe-next.js-superbase. You will be able to set up your Stripe account and log in with Next.js and Superbase. It's a full stack app that helps you to start building right there. Currently it's got 731 stars. If you like it, I would super appreciate it if you can like and start this GitHub for me, and I'll keep making sure that this is being updated and will be much better than the current version. But yeah, I hope in this video the React tips was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.